Three, two, one. Hi, I'm Bill Jones, and I'm just thrilled to be joined now by former astronaut Vance Brand, who was born in Longmont, attended the University of Colorado, where he got his degree in aeronautical engineering. Vance was also on several space flights, including the Apollo-Soyuz test flight in 1975, which was kind of the preceder, the run up to international cooperation in space flight. And he was also on several, I think it was three different space shuttles. So, Brand, again, I'm thrilled to have you here, and thanks for being with us.
Well, nice to be here. Nice talking with you.
Well, Vance, of course, the reason why we're doing this is because the 50th anniversary is coming up, July 20th, 1969, when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, along with Michael Collins orbiting the moon, they first touched down on the moon. And anybody who's old enough, myself included, remembers exactly where they were and what they were doing when man took his first steps on the moon. You were about to go into outer space a little bit later on. Where were you, and what were you thinking as you watched it?
Well, we were all in, a lot of us were in mission control and interviewing what was going on there. It was a very exciting mission, and Apollo 11 crew did a great job on it. And, well, we were all thrilled to view the first landing on the moon and seeing people walking around up there.
Well, I remember watching it on a black and white TV, kind of those ghostly figures we had of Neil Armstrong's first steps on the moon. I remember thinking, and a lot of my friends who were teenagers as well remember thinking, well, we're going to be on Mars easily by the year 2000. Well, 2000 is long since come and gone. What happened? Why didn't we ever make it to Mars?
Well, that's a good question. Thinking back 50 years, the space program was really going great guns. The manned side of it, especially at that time, although it may look easy to people now, it was a very tough job. In less than a decade, figuring out how to take people to the moon and bring them back in good shape. I think, well, back then we all thought that we would keep charging, and we have in some ways since then. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, you mentioned going to Mars. Well, we thought that would, although that was a tougher job yet, we thought well, I look back now and think, we never went to Mars. I can't believe it. The U.S. Has great capabilities in space, and since the lunar landing 50 years ago, we've done great things in the unmanned area. The robots have gone out into the universe and explored several moons and planets, and even gone out to the past Pluto, to the edge of the universe. So we've done a lot of just outstanding work in those areas in the last 50 years, but we never made it to Mars.
I'm a big fan of NASA and the space program, and some of the images we've had transmitted back to us from Mars have been incredible. Also, as you mentioned, Pluto and elsewhere, but we just have never landed a man yet on Mars. I want to get into the future of space exploration a little bit later on, but first of all, let's get into you. Tell me about your early days. How did you first know that you wanted to be an astronaut?
Well, when I was in high school, the job didn't exist. The only people in space were cartoon characters like Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon, things that we saw in the movies. And so I didn't realize it was possible to go into space until Yuri Gagarin went into space. Later, Alan Shepard, John Glenn, and I was very inspired by that. But actually, when I got out of college, I didn't know what I wanted to do in life. And the first step was easy. Went into the Marine Corps, served there, and learned how to fly. And went to Japan for 15 months and flew jets in Japan. Later went into the Air Guard, but it was when I learned to fly, I used to be at an air base where I could watch the what was back then F-86 jets taking off. I thought, that's beautiful. I just like to do that. And so that's when I found out what I'd like to do in life at about the age of 22, and continued on. Later was a Lockheed test pilot, and after that was lucky enough to get into the astronaut program.
Well, as I remember, the original 7 Mercury astronauts, John Glenn, Jack Swigert from Colorado, Scott Carpenter from Colorado, Alan Shepard, that class was recruited in 1959, I believe. When were you recruited by NASA?
I was in the 5th class, which was recruited in 1966.
Of course, there's been a movie made. The movie is called The Right Stuff, meaning these original 7 Mercury astronauts all had the right stuff to fly in space. Can you define what they mean by the right stuff?
Well, back then, NASA, the space program was in its infancy. And people like Deke Slayton, who was one of the original 7 astronauts, was helping to choose people that were most experienced in flying, especially military flying at that time, which involved either experience as a test pilot or, in some cases, people who'd been in combat. So those were the type of people that were being noticed as having the right stuff.
I've never met a test pilot before, but I think of the movie Top Gun, and we all have an image. I think Americans have an image that Top Gun pilots, test pilots, are very courageous. Maybe they have a certain moxie about them. Is that hype, or is there something to that?
Well, I think that's probably exaggerating. Most of them love to fly, and most of them knew there was danger, but they did things to minimize that danger. They learned systems well, and it took courage in some cases, but I think a lot of test pilots just felt lucky to be test pilots and enjoyed what they were doing.
Okay, so far we've learned that you were recruited by NASA in 1966. Then on July 20th, 1969, when Neil Armstrong took those first steps on the moon, along with Buzz Aldrin, that you were in mission control, watching it from the heart of NASA control. Let's talk about your career. Your first space flight was in 1975 on board the Apollo-Soyuz test flight, the first international mission. I think Deke Slayton was on that. Is that right, or was it somebody else?
Yeah, Tom Stafford, who at the time was a brigadier general in the Air Force. Deke Slayton, who had been a NASA manager, and before that, one of the original 7. and myself. On the other side, we had two Russians, Alexei Leonov and Valery Kubasov. It was in the middle of the Cold War, and I guess, well, back around probably in the early 60s, it was Russians and Americans started talking about a joint mission, but they were enemies, and nothing ever happened until in the early 70s when there were a few meetings and people got serious about meeting in space. So I was on the mission that evolved out of that, and it was a great mission. It was a lot of international travel and relations involved, and I thought, I thought it was perhaps one small step toward ending the Cold War, which finally ended around 1990.
Well, from what I understand, though, that mission almost ended in disaster because of some poisonous gas that could have been fatal. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. The mission had gone perfectly, and at the very end, coming through the atmosphere at about in the range of 50,000 feet down to 30,000 feet, why we had a mixture of hydrazine and nitrogen tetroxide fumes into the cabin, and it was unexpected. It sent us to the hospital in Hawaii for about a week, and after that I was jogging again in about 2 weeks.
I understand you were unconscious for a while. Is that correct?
Well, I guess for a minute or so. And anyway, Tom Stafford put a mask on my face when I passed out. I was next to the steam vent where all the fumes were coming in. So, and very shortly, it was pure oxygen coming through the mask, so I recovered quickly.
We're speaking to Vance Brand, astronaut who was on board 3 Space Shuttle missions. We want to get into that right now. And also on the Apollo-Soyuz test flight in 1975. Researching your bio, I'm a little bit confused. I see you were on STS-35, STS-41, and another one, but they're not in chronological order. I thought we had 135 or so, 140 maybe, shuttle flights, but I'm a little bit confused. Your first shuttle flight, was that on board STS-35, and was that the first operational shuttle flight?
Oh, well, yes, some of that data is a little confusing. I had 3 shuttle flights, STS-5, 41B, and 35. And the one in the middle is not in order because they changed the numbering system. But so STS-5 was the first operational mission of the shuttle. And we had a crew of 4, STS-41B. We had a lot of EVA activity, guys out 100 yards from the spacecraft, untethered, flying the Lockheed Martin backpack. And STS-35 was purely an astronomy mission.
So you were the commander of 3 space shuttle flights, but you were scheduled for a 4th, STS-61, in October of 1986 on board the Space Shuttle Challenger. But of course, as we all know, in January of 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger blew up 73 seconds, I believe, after launch. So you're watching this like the rest of America is. You know that you were scheduled to go up in that very craft just about 10 months later, and it blew up in front of everyone's eyes. What was going through your mind as you watched this unfold?
Well, I think everybody should understand that although all efforts are made to make space flight safe, and safety translates into mission success. That flying in space does have risks involved. It's obvious, and that will continue. If it does not, if we try to be so risk-free that we'll not ever risk people's lives, space flight is risky. In sort of the same sense that early aviation is risky. And even now, in aviation, we have not many, but we have a few accidents.
So despite the Challenger disaster in 1986 and later on the Columbia disaster in 2003, you think NASA has been doing a pretty good job of balancing risk against what they're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I do. I absolutely do. In a way, it was a miracle that we put human beings on the surface of the moon back 50 years ago. It was just an unbelievably good job. 400,000 workers were involved, and a lot of talented management. And I think NASA is still doing a good job in balancing risk versus mission success.
I don't want to get political here at all, but I think most Americans think that the Russian space program, that they've lost many more astronauts, many more lives have been lost in their space program than ours. And if you don't want to answer this, that's fine. I don't want to corner you, but do you think NASA's doing a better job? Do you think we're doing a better job of protecting human lives as we move forward into space compared to our counterparts in the former Soviet Union?
Well, obviously, I think we learned a little bit from them in the beginning of the space program, but I think since they've gotten involved in flying with us, why, they've learned a lot. And I know back at the time that we flew Apollo-Soyuz, we were way ahead technologically. For example, we had a spacecraft computer, and they hadn't put a computer on the spacecraft yet. They had something that was sort of a electromechanical selector that they used to turn on a light or to start the deorbit program. So I think in my mind, they did some great things in the beginning. They took a lot of risks, and they did some magnificent things, like putting robots on the moon first. But, well, I think we're ahead of them, but I'm more concerned about maintaining a lead over the rest of the world. China's coming up real fast. I would like to see America retain its lead in space. And we could go to Mars with people. I know we've done magnificent things with robots up there, but it's the will of the people is what has to be behind space.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but so it's the will of the people is what you're saying here. I think back to a few short years after we landed on the moon with Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong, maybe Apollo 14 or 15, that none of the major networks even carried a live news conference from the astronauts who were on their way to the moon because the American public had become bored with it. We've done it a couple of times. There's nothing new here. So I think what you're saying is, unless the people are behind it, well, then Congress isn't going to be behind it, is not going to fund it. So it really boils down to, if we have a national will to move forward with the space program, that's the only way we can do it. Is that what you're saying? I don't mean to put words in your mouth.
Well, I think what it takes is a goal stated nationally, and then funding to support that. In the past, we've had the goal without sufficient funding, or I guess you'd say public support to carry through on it. So in the future, We had a very simplistic goal when we went to the moon, which was a big help in focusing everyone.
Mm-hmm.
It was take people to the moon, let them walk around on it, and bring them back safely. That was the goal. We need to do a little bit more research on how to build a spacecraft that will go to Mars, but I don't think there are researchers sufficiently focused right now. If we had a goal and the money to back it up, it would be very focused, and we could make it probably within a decade.
Well, you say the goal was a very simple one when we first went to the moon: send people to the moon, have them walk around a bit, and come back. Only one time did we almost not accomplish that mission's goal, and that was Apollo 13 with James Lovell, Fred Hayes, and Colorado astronaut Jack Swigert. From what I understand from my research, tell me if I'm wrong here, you played a role. You were part of the ground control mission on Apollo 13. I think that's right. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I can do that. By the way, Jack Swigert and I were in the same astronaut group, the fifth group, and I knew Jack and liked him very well. But my role in Apollo 13 was a support crewman. You know, you have, back then, you had the prime crew that flew the mission, the backup crew that would replace any members that got sick or somehow were prevented from flying. And then you had the support crew, generally three guys that took care of helping the crew. I spent a lot of time at KSC, for example. My job as a support crewmate led me to following progress of the spaceship as it was going through testing and strapping the crew in, helping 4 or 5 other guys strap the crew in on the pad for the flight and that sort of thing. So I was a Capcom when I got back to Houston, one of the 3 or 4 Capcoms on Apollo 13. And it was just a magnificent job that NASA did, that people like, flight directors. There were several of them, Gene Kranz and Lynn Lenny, several others, did just a magnificent job in figuring out what was wrong, what had happened up there, and how to get those guys home safely. So, I was involved in the periphery of it.
As I remember, Jack Swigert was not part of the original crew on Apollo 13. He filled in for somebody who got sick a few days earlier.
Ken Mattingly. Yeah.
So you were part of the support crew, not the backup crew for Apollo 13.
I did on Apollo 15, which was Dave Scott's crew that went to a very hilly region of the moon on a great mission that was very successful. So I was a backup command module pilot. Had anybody broken a leg or gotten measles? And of course, we were all wanting the best for the prime crew, but we were hoping too that somehow we could get to fly on the mission.
Vance Brand, born and raised in Longmont, Colorado, the commander of 3 Space Shuttle missions, was scheduled for the 4th onboard Challenger in October of 1986, but of course that program was put on hold in January of 1986 when the Challenger blew up shortly after taking off from Cape Canaveral. He also was a pioneer in international space relations as a member of the Apollo-Soyuz test flight in 1975, and he was part of the backup crew. Never made it to the moon, but if somebody had gotten sick, he would have been going to the moon on Apollo 15. Vance, I really do appreciate your time. Thank you very much.